You remember George. This is Mary. Well, I'll be seeing you.
There's oftentimes a real subtlety and grace in the guiding hand of a good woman, so much so that her quiet wisdom can even go unnoticed, but her effect is still enormous. One of the best examples of this is Frank Capra's Christmas classic, It's a Wonderful Life. The movie follows the life of George Bailey, a character played by Jimmy Stewart who grows up in the small town of Bedford Falls. The magnanimous George always planned to leave town someday and to move on to bigger and better things.
Mary, I know what I'm going to do tomorrow and the next day and next year and a year after that. I'm shaking the dust of this crummy little town off my feet and I'm going to see the world.
However, the rash and bold George is contrasted by the measured and thoughtful Mary Hatch, played by Donna Reed, who would prefer that George not leave town and instead build his life there. But before he can make any decision, his father, who runs the local building and loan, gets sick and asks George to take over the business until his brother Harry graduates from college. While working, George soon discovers that the building and loan is more important to Bedford Falls than he first realized. It is the only fair establishment in town where people can go for money. The other spot is owned by a greedy and ruthless old man named Potter.
There's just one thing more, though. This town needs this measly one-horse institution, if only to have some place where people can come without crawling to Potter.
George's brother eventually returns home after college and lets George know that he won't be taking over the company after all. A distraught George is on the verge of leaving the company and allowing Potter to take control of the town when he finds out that Mary Hatch has returned home from college as well. So, with a little prodding, George decides to pay her a visit. Shortly after, he decides to stay with the company and he marries Mary. The two are set for a honeymoon vacation when a financial crisis hits the town. People make a run on the building and loan, demanding their money, and once again, George's plans are shattered, and he's forced to use his honeymoon money to keep the company afloat. He is able to save the business, but the heaviness of his sacrifices begin to weigh on him. George leaves work that day crushed by the loss of his honeymoon adventure, but unbeknownst to him, Mary had been working on creating a honeymoon hotel in the house that they had fallen in love in front of years before. George is uplifted, and they even decide to make the house into their home. Time passes by and the Baileys begin to raise a family, and George settles into his role as building and loan manager. He begins to really change the community for the better. Things are finally starting to look up for him when disaster strikes again. One of his employees loses a substantial amount of money, making George guilty of fraud and effectively sending him to prison.
Where's that money? You realize what this means? It means bankruptcy and scandal and prison. That's what it means. One of us is going to jail. Well, it's not going to be me.
In a state of emotional panic, George takes off and eventually finds himself on a bridge with the intent to end his own life, until he sees another man drowning below, and he forgets his own suffering and dives in to save him. We soon discovered that the man's name is Clarence, and he is a self-proclaimed angel sent to save George. A skeptical George then opens up about his troubles and mutters that it would have been better had he never been born at all.
What'd you say?
I said I wish I'd never been born.
Clarence then resolves to show George a glimpse of what the world would look like had he never been born.
You've got your wish. You've never been born.
George is astonished at how different the world would have looked without him, and how Bedford Falls has become a harsh and cruel place without the generosity of his building and loan. George, filled with gratitude for the life he had been given, rushes home to his family only to discover that while he was gone, Mary had been calling in favors from the entire town.
Mary did it, George. Mary did it. She told some people you were in trouble with it. They scattered all over town collecting money.
And they had responded by raising more than enough money to save the building and loan and to keep him out of prison. Now, it's very easy for us throughout the film to focus solely on the wild and heroic actions of George as he battles Potter, but we don't want to miss the subtlety and grace and the guiding hand of Mary. Her character actually stands in clear opposition to the cruel Mr. Potter. Mary is his antithesis. While George leads by his boldness and perseverance, she leads by her devotion and beauty. And rather than taking our focus off the heroic actions of George, she expands our vision of them and adds depth to him as a character as she gently guides him along the right path. I think this is why It's a Wonderful Life is such a beloved Christmas movie, because in it we see that the actions of the woman can exalt even God. And rather than taking our focus off of Christ's actions, she expands our vision of them. It is her goodness which is the antithesis of the cruel enemy, and her subtlety and grace can often go unnoticed, but her effect is still enormous, and the guiding hand that she offers to those whom she loves.